Hello and welcome to Dental Education Podcast, the podcast series where we share knowledge and experience to provide value to you and your dental practice. I'm your host, Phil Cole, and in today's episode, I have brought my brother on, who is a transition consultant for Class Solutions with me out in the Wisconsin area. And we thought I'd have a little bit of fun today by just kind of talking a little bit about some of the mishaps that we have when it comes to dental transitions. Some of the things that I think that sellers feel they have for their practice, maybe misunderstood, not paying attention to, so that by the time it gets to us as transition consultants, we have to give them maybe sometimes some really bad news, I guess is probably a good way to put it. But so today, my brother Dan Cole is on here with me. Daniel, thanks for being on the show. And so I thought I would start with having probably the first one that we run across a lot of times, and that is, of course, accounting issues. And I think that that runs in all kinds of gamuts. But as we were talking about for today's episode, we're going to do some real live scenarios, the actual doctors. So I will take my first one that was out of Ohio. He was met with him to sell his practice and everything, wanted to see the numbers. Let's look at that. And then I saw immediately that he showed a major loss in the practice. So then I said, okay, well, let's look at some other, some more years. Loss. And then he presumed to proudly say he has showed a loss for 15 years straight. And I have run a great practice. My CPA has been awesome with me because we have run everything through the business. And then he presumed to be so proud that he's never paid for toilet paper, paper towel, cleaning supplies, never has had to mow his lawn at home because he used the same lawn mowing service, all this stuff, and yet had a P&L that had maybe 13 categories. And it was all jumbled into this little thing, and he was so proud of it. And so those who are listening today, the problem with that is we couldn't do anything. It's an unsellable practice. It was not a large practice either. It was a smaller practice, only doing, 500,000, but I don't know what to pull out. There's nothing to judge. There's nothing specific. And I think that, you and I run across this all the time. These P&Ls are sometimes very basic. If I'm not mistaken, didn't you have one that was only 8 lines at one time, or we've had a transition consultant, at least when we talked about it, had one that only had 8 lines of expenses. But when we're working with that kind of stuff, got that, that jumbled up mess, there's nothing that we can do with it. And so it's, what I mean?
I had one out here that the doc just used his QuickBooks as a quick dump for his receipts. So when we went to value the practice and look at his P&Ls that he was giving me, none of it made sense. It was random categories. I'm like, is this really what your CPA goes off of? We then in turn called the CPA to talk to the CPA to see what they went off of, and it was a big firm, and they're like, well, we don't really do that. That's all. Somebody else goes through the P&L and fixes that, and then we get it and we just oversee the taxes and look at the taxes. So I was forced to have to just take the P&L from the taxes and go by that, because nobody was doing good bookkeeping for the dentist. And it's a great practice. It's a great practice, but he just didn't know any better. He just knew that he needed to save his receipts. So any bills that came through, just put it into QuickBooks. They'll figure it out. So, and it makes it a mess. trying to figure out, like, A, is this dentist hiding anything? B, in this case, it was like, no, he's not hiding anything. He just didn't know any better.
Yeah, but
So
the problem is though is that's a good you just brought up a good point though for the buyers out there is that is stuff that we run into too is them hiding stuff, you know,
correct.
where they are. So for my example, the guy in Ohio, I mean hiding everything. So we have no clue what the expenses are on that practice. We have no idea what the profitability of that practice was or could be. And when I'm saying loss, I'm not saying, you know, you get some offices that we come across when we're doing the valuations and stuff that they show, you know, 1 or 2 years of, you know, zero, or they're in the hole by 5,000, maybe 10,000. This guy's, you know, P&Ls and taxes are showing losses of, you know, 60 to $100,000 every fargan year. So that's, you know, that's one of those things where it's, as a buyer, that's one of those things with our buyer advocacy program. We look at that, we try to analyze that for you and try to pull that all out. What can be adjusted out? But when it can't be adjusted out, that's one of those things where, you know, run. Um,
Yeah.
you know what I mean? Because we have one out in Missouri right now that's kind of that same thing. The broker that did the valuation basically, their valuation came out that it was, you know, zero. There was no profitability, yet they still wanted 600, $700,000, I think it was. I can't remember. And yet nothing could be explained once again. And so, you know, I know that we sat there and scratched our heads on where can you say this practice is worth this much? And I think when it comes to that, you know, we have the other problem, right? And that is where CPAs or whoever their advisors are telling them that if they produce, you know, $1 million, their practice is worth $1 million, which is a whole
Yeah.
nother problem.
Well, and I was just gonna say too, like, I mean, it's not just us scrutinizing this stuff. It's we're ultimately scrutinizing it to go through. It's got to go through underwriting with the bank. So, I mean, if the bank's going to do the same thing when they look for a buyer and go through this process, they're going to scrutinize it and look at what the profitability is, and is this a good deal to underwrite. You can't go and screw yourself, uh, by doing that. Some people just think like they don't realize that that last 3 years or even that last 5 years going into retirement, like having your books look good for a buyer is huge. It's huge. It makes the sale of the practice so much easier. And all these guys that are out there that aren't like they don't have any hobbies, they don't necessarily have a plan to retire or anything of that nature. They just all of a sudden say, "Hey, Dan, I'm done. I'm done, and I'm hoping that you can sell my practice in the next 6 months." Like there's nothing we can do, right? Like if you haven't put any thought process into your books to make sure things are cleaned up and things make sense and things are explainable, like we could have the greatest buyer in the world and love the practice, love the location, love everything about the practice. But if the bank says, sorry, we can't make this roll, we're toast. So you and I kind of think of as like pre-underwriting, right? We're just trying to make sure that everything is set up very transparently so that the banks know exactly what's going on and that it can be a smooth deal. And it just nobody's telling doctors this. They're not telling them that, hey, 5 years out, you probably should take some time to sit down with your CPA and really get this thing organized. Like enough of the status quo. Let's get things organized. Let's get with your financial planner so that your financial planner and your CPA are working together so that when you get to your broker or transition consultant like us, like it's not a cluster. Not a
Well,
cluster.
I mean, the biggest reason why we started and changed to a lifetime valuation, right, is this reason right here, as at least one of the two reasons. But it was a big reason, right? Because how many times do we get stuff handed to us, like you said, 6 months, a year out, and it's just like, that we can't clean this up this fast. Plus, not only that, but you can clean it up, but you also got to start showing a little bit of a history of the cleaned up process, and that this wasn't one of those things that was fixed real quick. So with our lifetime valuations, that's the whole reason for that. Let's go in, let's dive into this stuff, let's see what needs to be cleaned up, and now we have time, and we can actually do a good transition instead of sitting there having something that is just muddled up, and you hope that you find, you know a lot of times I feel like there's people out there that just hope that they find the buyer that isn't smart enough to figure it out and get and sell it. But I think the biggest thing that sellers have to understand is the savviness of the buyers nowadays.
Yeah.
I mean, 10 years ago doing this, there was the buyers weren't as savvy as they are now. And I would say that even 3 years ago, before COVID versus after COVID, that the young guys and gals do their research. They're learning. They're trying to educate themselves on this, which, like I said, I think is just a huge thing. It's a big difference when it comes to that. And like you said, having that get that cleaned up and stuff makes a tremendous difference. Um,
I know
Go
we
ahead.
always talk about with buyers, especially doing our buyer advocate program, about making sure that you have your team solidified, right? Whether it be your CPA, your attorney, um, your coach, um, your dealer rep, all those different things. We always talk about that with buyers, but it's it's you have to have this stuff as a seller as well, like solidified, because they don't you some of the things, just coming from my background of financial planning, like you can't just move assets around super fast. And people that haven't done any don't understand the difference between accumulation and distribution. Like, when you get with a distribution planner, it's it's a different conversation. It takes time for them to be able to get things into tax advantageous uh, holdings for you, so that you can actually retire properly. Like, there's so much to this that we got to make sure you got the right people in the right seats in the bus for your team. um People just gotta they gotta talk about this. It's not as simple as just, I'm just gonna put a sign outside and sell my practice because I collect $1 million. I'm gonna get $1 million, and my wife and I, or my husband and I, are gonna be just fine moving forward.
Yeah, I
There,
think the other thing is too, is since you reintroduced the $1 million, that I'm thinking the $1 million. I think the other big mistake that we run across a lot too is doctors talking to DSOs and getting a DSO number from them, and
correct.
thinking that that's the value of their practice. I mean, everybody that's listening to this episode has to understand, if you're a single doctor practice, banks are not using EBITDA or EBITDA, whatever you want to say it, are not using EBITDA as the valuation process. The reason why the DSOs use that is because it's private equity, and private equity will go in and tear everything up and find out how much they can suck from the blood from that practice to recoup everything, and how much they're going to force the seller to work it off in return, um, versus a bank that's going to use a capitalized earnings method, you know, and be able to base the loan off of a fair market value. So when you get these guys that are sitting there saying that, well, I had uh, Heartland or Aspen or something, and they offered me, 1.4 million, and you are only doing 1.1 million. don't be naive enough to sit there and think that that extra 300,000 they're giving you isn't going to get made up somehow. I mean, think of, I always sit there and amazed by it, and is because it'd be like me taking my car to you and sitting there saying that, hey, someone said that they would give me, it's the Kelly Blue Book is 10,000 for it, but someone told me they'd give me 13,000 for it. Well, the only reason why that car is worth $13,000 is because that guy's willing to pay that. You know what I mean? And that's the same thing with the private equities. They know they're willing to pay that because they have their formula of how they're going to bleed that practice and how they're going to work you to death to get that. That's all there is to it.
Yeah, it goes
Versus
into their portfolio. I mean, that's
right.
so.
When they need to sell them in blocks of 10 and they need one more practice to get that 10 so they can go to the next higher private equity group and sell off those 10, guess what? They're going to overpay for that practice because they can. But there's no way that you go to a bank and a bank is going to sit there and give you, 130% value on that practice, unless it would, to me, if a bank would do that, then there's got to be something in there that I've never seen before. So I think that's one of those things that sellers or owners got to understand. Do not get the fancy postcard from the DSOs and sit there and say, hey, because we have a dermatologist out in New York and they came in and they offered him, $700,000 more than what that he's actually producing. And, little does he know that, after I told him, ask him this, and we went through a checklist of things to ask, he's just like, yeah, man, they're going to work me to death. I wanted more vacation time. I wanted this, I wanted that. And they're saying that that's after the first year of this and then that. And I'm like, no one's going to do that without some type of stipulation. So,
and who wants to work harder going in your years moving towards retirement? That's what these guys don't realize. Like, they're going to work you, and you're not going to get credit for certain things that you did get credit for as an owner. You are an employee now. You're an employee, and now we're going to dictate to you exactly how this is going to work. And if it doesn't, oh, by the way, you're not going to get your final piece, your final payout to what you thought you were going to get. So anytime I think you're going to get a 98-page contract, you got to ask yourself, shh, this is awfully large, and they've got some pretty high-powered attorneys. I might want to rethink this. And in fairness to that, there's a lot of really great dentists that would like to maintain private practice and have a private practice experience for patients. And there's a lot of patients out there that really appreciate a private practice experience. And that's a big deal. And if there's dentists out there right now or in any healthcare field, like, give that to your patients. Give them the opportunity at least to have a private practice experience after you're gone. So
yeah, no, 100%. So you got one?
Yeah, I mean, the one thing that I wanted to talk about is right now, obviously, with hygiene being an issue right now, and it seems like every dentist office is looking for a hygienist at one point or another. We notice that the overheads when we go to do these valuations are starting to creep up pretty high. And when you talk to the dentist, they're like, well, it's because I'm down a hygienist and I got, I'm paying the contract labor to come in, the hygienist to fill it out. Like, the hygienists are killing me. Now if I bring in a hygienist, I gotta pay him $50 an hour, and that just runs up my overhead. And I gotta pay him all these benefits because the DSOs are paying benefits. So I know this is probably unpacking a whole can of worms, but it's really not the case, especially with hygiene. From my experience, like, hygiene is a producer, right?
Right.
Like, they produce. And I guess the one question I wanted to put out to you is that I just heard in a study club meeting the other night is like the big groups, when hygienists go into the big groups, forcing them to sell dentistry. And they got to have, they're getting production bonuses and all these different things. And, you know, who's the top hygienist, who's this, who's that, blah, blah, blah. But we don't know whether or not, like, is it good dentistry? And we always talk about, like, there's a baseline. As long as you produce X amount of dollars per hour as a hygienist, right? Then you're good. I don't know that dentists necessarily look at it that way, and I guess I'm looking for your feedback. You know, how with our coaching and stuff, it's pretty easy to put it into our forecasting stuff and say, if a hygienist produces X amount of dollars per hour, can I pay her X amount of dollars? Because from my experience, what I've seen is most of these hygienists don't necessarily want to work for these big groups, but they're not getting a good experience from the private practice dentist either. So if they're not getting it there, then they might as well go get some pay and some benefits somewhere else. But if they did get an experience, like they would do it. And things are very discombobulated right now with a shortage in hygiene and doctors that feel they got to pay astronomical amounts that they're not going to be able to recover. So
Well, I think the biggest thing with that though is when we run across most of those situations, I would say that it would be system breakdown and or the non the not paying attention to your numbers, and not doing things and setting things up to be specific analytics or goal oriented. So, for example, like you said with our coaching, you know, bare minimum should be 160 bucks an hour for a hygienist, right? But right now, when we do our assessments and stuff, it's, I would say the common number for hygiene producing right now is between 100 to 115. That's what we're seeing on quite a bit of the assessments. So 160 is minimum. So once again, I think it's the misunderstanding that or the ease. This might sound maybe a little bit insulting, but it's kind of, it happens with all of us, right? That falling into the negativity and not being positive about it and not trying to find a solution, but instead give the excuse, right? So
right.
you can't give the excuse, because you and I know that when we run these break even points, when Ashley is doing the forecasting for us for the accounting and stuff, we've put them in the forecasting all the time. And if we put in there where that hygienist, he or she will produce X, it does not affect the overhead very much. And I think it's the same thing. And I don't know where it started. I don't know where it starts, and I don't know how to get it out there enough to cancel it. But it kind of goes back to when we were in the supply business, right? What was the one thing that the doctors, when it came to high overhead, what was the one thing that they always thought they needed to do? It's like, well, I just need to find another supplier. I need to cut my supplies. Supplies make up 5 to 6% of the business. That's it. So
Right.
you for some reason are attracted to that 5%, and why? I always think to myself, and that's, once again, hopefully this isn't insulting, but I think once again, it's always one of those things where it's easy.
Right.
You just have to tell your supply rep, you either got to lower your supplies or I'm going to Shine, Patterson, Benco, wherever, right? And but what it does is you move over and you save $1,000, but you're not paying attention to the other 95% of the practice that can then turn around and make you $100,000. You know, so when it comes to that, with that hygiene thing, once again, I think the other big huge thing is like, I will say 90% of our practices, when they call us and they want coaching, do not set their daily goals for production. They do not have daily production goals. Okay. Well, so now you're not paying attention. It's just like your CPA or your bookkeeping, right? If you just have someone doing it, but you're not reviewing your P&Ls and your balance sheets, I mean, that's Ashley for us. She calls once a week just to check in. And then we do our quarterly reviews with them to make sure that we are keeping them inside those books. Same thing, no goals there. I would say probably the biggest mistake that Dennis we run across, no KPI monitoring whatsoever. No metrics monitoring, benchmark, whatever you want to call them. They just sit there and allow for that to ignore that. And so when it comes to these big overheads, if you're not paying attention to your books, your P&Ls, and you're not paying attention to your production goals and stuff, then you have nothing else to blame it on besides the fact that not paying attention to those two things are automatically going to put you in a high overhead. It's just all there is to it. We have a doctor right now that basically the hygiene department wants 15-minute breaks between each patient so that they can unwind. Okay. Now, if you don't do anything about that, you have to realize you are the only practice probably besides maybe 10 other ones in the United States that give them a 15-minute break so they can unwind between patients. Okay. But when doing that and looking at that, you're giving up, by the time you do that full day, you're giving up 2 patients per hygienist a day. So if you got 4 hygienists like this, then you're giving up basically 8 patients, 8 hygiene. And then you can't figure out why you're booked out 10 months.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So it's like getting those things, like you say. So now you need to buy that 4th hygienist leaves, right? And now you're like, oh crap, I really got to replace this person. But all the hygienists in this area right now are asking for $60 an hour. They're asking for $60 an hour because you got the DSOs, you have the clinics and stuff like that are paying up because they're desperate for hygiene too. And so now you feel like you're in a conundrum, but that conundrum, if you actually would fix the other things around it, would be able to be paid $60 an hour.
And not only that, but if you're getting close to retirement, like it just makes it look better for the banks. I mean, bringing it full circle, right? This is the whole point. Well, my overhead's too high. Yeah, well, I mean, you limit your buying scope. There's not as many buyers are going to want to buy something that's not as profitable. These guys have got high student debt. They got all this stuff. Everybody's telling them that they can't buy a practice because oh well, you got $500,000 in student debt. You can't afford a practice. We know that's garbage. But if the sellers would just get their books cleaned up and get their team motivated and moving in those last 5 years, like it should be a fairly smooth process. Smooth process.
I mean, listen, we had your one office out in Wisconsin, and what were the personnel, I'll just put it that way so we don't pinpoint the office, but the personnel that they continue to get for interviews and stuff like that, what were they asking for? Communication, and they were asking for, they're looking for a doctor that is going to help them become better in their career, right? That's what these guys want. They want to go to a healthy, fun place to work, something that isn't discombobulated and so forth like that. I have an office in New York, and so they want to put a partnership together. So we go through this partnership thing, but one thinks that the practice wants to go in this direction, other one wants to go in this direction. And I said, what does the team think? And well, I mean, then of course, what does the one doctor say? Well, they want to go in my direction. The other one, like, no, I've talked to them. They want to go in my direction. Well, guess what? Of course the team members are doing. we're going to say whatever it is to the person that we're talking to at that time,
Yeah.
so we don't tick them off, right? So I said, well, you know what? Why don't we? Our coaches, we do surveys to each one of the members. Would you allow me to do a coaching survey where we ask them 17 different things about the practice and rate it from a score of 1 to 5, right? It was astonishing to see that when I asked these guys, it's all confidential. So each person gets this confidential survey. And when we haven't even had this conversation with them yet, we're going to do, I'm now going to do one-on-one interviews because there's a couple of the surveys that I want to dive a little bit deeper, but just getting those surveys back, astonishing to see where they say communication sucks. Doctors have no clear vision. I don't feel as though they allow me to grow. I want to do I want to do injections, but they told me that I have to pay for it. Just all these things where you can see where they think that they have this practice that everybody loves them, and they don't. I mean, the bunch of the surveys also said that one wants to expand, and I don't know why we can't just, treat our patients like we always have with love and care. Why do we have to expand? So it's one of those things, like you said, going back to that overhead and stuff. These are, I mean, really the overhead, cutting the overhead down and bringing that down stuff. A lot of times, I'm just telling you, it's because of you're not looking at the team and going back, like you said, full circle. We're not looking at cleaning things up. It's innate in the healthcare industry to, I feel, is you go to work and you just see patients and you just fall into the trap of this is what I'm supposed to do. And you're not. You're a business owner at the same time. You have to check out of being the doctor, and you have to check into being, I am the business owner now. And it doesn't have to be that long. I just did another podcast, going through some different metrics and stuff. And I went outside the box, not going with all the financial metrics all the time, but some of these kind of things that we're talking about right now that make a huge impact on the financials, but they don't understand. And that's just a huge problem when it comes to this stuff, because if we're not paying attention to, if we're not wanting to put this all in together as a piece, that overhead just continues to grow and grow and grow.
Wow. And I mean, shameless plug to us, right, is the fact that this is like, we're not just putting a price on a bar napkin for a valuation of a practice, right? Like, there's a lot more love and care that goes into this. Like, we believe in investing a lot of time into these doctors so that they can have a simple, fair, and transparent transition that has as little buyer's and seller's remorse as feasibly possible. And that all these things that we're talking about are what come up in initial conversations that we have with these guys when they say, hey, I'm thinking about selling my practice. Well, hopefully you're thinking about selling your practice 5 years, 10 years ahead of time, and we're able to put you in front of the right people to make the right decisions as much as feasibly possible. But like, it's not just, hey, here's my P&Ls, here's my taxes, give me a price, I need out. We just do a lot more than that on our side, and there's a lot more thought process that goes into it. So,
well, I think that's the other big reason, though, why we do our valuations in-house. There's a lot of them out there that will ship those out to third-party companies to do those valuations and stuff like that. And that's why it's important, because when we're working as an individual with that doctor on that valuation, we're doing the bigger deep dive, and we're making sure that we're finding out all those things. Because the other important thing for me as Class Solutions is making sure that that buyer, that transparency is just a gigantic thing for me, right? It's they've got to be fair, and we got to be transparent. And I've turned a lot of doctors away, more than what I probably wanted to, but I turn a lot away because, that transparency, when they hear that, well, I mean, do you have to do this? Do you got to dive in here? No, yeah, we do, because that's the only way to be fair to the buyer and make sure that that buyer doesn't have any buyer's remorse. Because the last thing I want for you as a transition consultant, or any of my other transition consultants, or myself, to sit there and have a year later the buyers sit there and go, yeah, we didn't catch this. Like the call from Arizona that I got from the gentleman that said, hey, my financial planner said I should call you. You could figure this out, but I think that I got screwed on this purchase. I've had it for 9 months now and I'm barely making it. So send me the broker's valuation, send me all the blah, blah, blah. Start doing a deep dive and everything. And I'm like, and according to this valuation, it says that you have 1,800 active patients. You don't have 1,800 active patients. You have 980.
Yikes.
And he's just like, well, because you can't just trust the report from EagleSoft, or Dentrix or any of those things, because garbage in, garbage out, right? Those reports are only as good as what you put in and how you put them in. Now but instead it's analyzing the numbers in a bigger deep dive. And now you have 980 patients. So guess what? You bought the practice that is half the size is what they advertise it at. Happens a lot. And once again, why is it that we always say, hey, number one number that you should be paying attention to and know as a practice owner as well, active patients. Make sure you know what your active patients are, because it's used throughout every single thing you do through your career. If someone can tell me, when I ask doctors, what's your active patient count, I'll say 80%. You've been, in dental just as long as I have. I would say, I'm not exaggerating, 80% of them do not know what their active patient count is.
Totally agreed.
Or even know how to. So when you don't have that number, and now in this case, you believed the report, and so when we do our buyer advocates, right? That's first thing that we do. Let's do our calculations and let's dive in. Let's actually see if the broker has the right active patients. Well, because if you do EagleSoft, remember, one of the biggest things that people will make a big mistake is you get that demographics report, in the middle of it, it says total active patients. And it'll say 8,000. That's 8,000 patients. That's pulling from everything that has been 4 years or more. You know darn well that that's not those are not active patients. So first you got to go up and go in the corner and you got to analyze what's been seen in the last 12 and 24 months. That's your active patients. And typically it's 1/3 of that number in the middle. But if someone doesn't know that, and if someone looks at that and thinks that, well, that's what the software says, that's what's accurate, you're screwed. And that's exactly what happened to this guy in Arizona. They looked at that and they went in there and did that. Then the two numbers up in the corner, the 12 and 24 months, were off too, which then tells me, guess what? They weren't sitting there purging. They weren't doing anything. So those things were, they were putting things in the computer wrong. And then which ended up, what they were doing is they were double every time a patient came in, even if so they came in for their temp, but then they came in for their crown, they activated as a new patient.
Oh.
So that, once again, you believed a report that is false. It wasn't EagleSoft's fault. It was the fact that they were inputting the numbers wrong, and this is what you get. So, these are just some examples, and we're definitely, I know that we're getting close to our time, so we'll have to take this up again, because I know that we had a couple other things down on our list that we were going to get to, but hopefully everybody that was listening today is gleaned some things. And once again, we're going to finish these other topics, so we're going to do a part 2 on this as well, because I think that hopefully this kind of gives that little bit of education. Once again, that's what our goal is to try to educate and make sure that we are ourselves as transparent as possible too, because good education, I think, makes people be able to have a better understanding. In the worst case scenario for us, at least we can say, told you.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of people out there that don't know what they don't know, and nobody's taking the time to just give them some basic education on this stuff. I am all for having another round because I got a few more things that we got to talk about.
Yeah,
So
so do
this
I.
was good.
So,
I
yep.
appreciate it.
So we'll plan on it. So thanks very much for getting on, and we'll make sure that we do part 2. So keep an eye open for that. If you enjoy our show, please rate, review us on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Phil Cole once again with Class Solutions. Thank you for being on Class Dental Education Podcasts. Thanks for listening, and we will talk soon.